Welcome. In this short tutorial, we're going to take a look at using the Curve Deformer as a way of building in the ability to transform and animate a drawing. So I'm going to select my pencil tool. I'm using the charcoal pencil, and I am going to draw a shape. Now when we're working with deformers, if we apply deformers into something that's already all like convoluted in shape, it's not going to be as easy to work with or as effective. So it's much better, even if we're intending something eventually to be following a curve shape like this, it'll be much better to initially create the shape that we're working with straight, or relatively so. It will make your life much easier as you work with it. So I've added in some line art. I'm going to go on the overlay layer, and I'm going to add in some other markings, and I'm putting in a variety of markings so we can kind of see a little bit of what happens as we work with some of this. And go back to the line art layer. We'll make the color art from it, go grab the paint bucket, go grab the fill it in. So now it's been filled in. What we want to do is add in a peg here. Nope, can't close, wrong button. Add a peg to this, so now we have a peg to it, and jump into our node view over here. So I have the peg selected, now I have my limb, and what I want to do is I want to create a deformation that's going to affect this drawing. Now, we have our deformation toolbar, which generally is going to be visible. If you don't see the deformation toolbar, right-click and choose deformation, and then that will add the toolbar to the window. And we'll see that it has a couple of different options available on it. The first thing we have to do is select the rigging tool. So once I do that, we'll notice how it changed our view. And we have a couple of different options on there. We'll discuss what those are as we go forward. Now with the rigging tool selected, I'll see I do have different options, and it defaults to doing the auto, so it just automatically guesses what you're trying to do. For this, we're going to be looking at using a curve deformer because that makes the most sense when we want something that's easy, like a blade of grass or a clump of hair, where we just want to kind of wiggle it and wave it and move it around. Or if you're animating, say, an octopus or a squid or something with tentacles, envelope allows us to modify a whole shape, so that works a little bit different. So in this video, we're just going to be looking at the curve deformer, so I will select that so it's not auto working with it. We'll see we do have a few other options. We don't really need to worry too much about those. First thing we do is establish what is going to be the origin point for this deformer. Usually we put it at kind of the base of something, and that is now with a simple click, and it inserts a point. Now what I'm going to do is add 3 additional points to this. So if I click and drag, we can see it's adding in this line, this curve. And it's doing it as a Bezier curve, as if I was drawing with the pen tool. So it puts handles on. So we pull back to the origin point. We can see now, wait, there is the second point. So you can see the origin point, that first one. Now I'll click, drag the second. Again, we're dragging back to it. The distance of these handles should be, each one should be about 1/3, and we should have 1/3 of the distance that is in between those. That will give kind of the best performance out of the handles. Now I can click and drag down. So again, we're pulling backwards. So if I pull up, you can see how it creates that pucker. We don't want that, and that gets us to the end. And now we don't worry about that extra point being there. And with that, we'll see it added in this deformation group. And if I look at that and see what's happening, we can see the initial offset and then my 3 curve points that it has put in. Now, the fun part about working with this is now I can just simply click on my transform tool. Notice it turns green. The rigging tool is deselected. If I select the rigging tool, it turns red. That tells me I'm not going to be animating. I'm actually modifying this. So if I did want to modify any of these points to clean up their positions, adjust the handle lengths. We can do all of that by going back to the rigging tool, and then I go to the transform tool to animate. So with that, now I can move this and we'll see how it moves. Now we'll start to notice that you can kind of create about a 90-degree bend. Anything more than that and it starts to really blow up, but you can see how these lines, and this is part of why when I did this, I intentionally drew different shapes of lines, both horizontal and vertical, so we can see how they're blowing up as I work with that. So we have to be aware of how it's affecting them when we animate, because as we move this or stretch this, these surface markings on the overlay are moving with it. You can see how I can go now. If I cross, we can see that doesn't really work. If we want to be able to cross an appendage like that, we probably need to set it up as cutout, so we have multiple layers, and then we can be adjusting, nudging up one layer in front of the other. Now you can certainly combine something like this where we have a combination of both cutout where it's in multiple pieces, and we have a deformer attached to it that allows further manipulation of that, so we can really finesse or fine-tune what is happening with our item. Now I'm just going to, oh, not F6, F5, extend it out. I didn't. Let's clear that keyframe. So now we're on frame 1, insert a keyframe here. Now when I look at this and see this, I'm like, well, if I want to go back to my original kind of position, up here we have our reset our current keyframe, which will reset it. So if we really break things, then we can reset it. So we have to make sure we're selecting the deformation group when we're trying to reset it. So now if I want to start there and go over a few frames here, now with the transform tool, I can pull this down. Again, notice if I go too far, we get that crossing. See, it's about 90 degrees. Now if I turn this, that's 45. Now suddenly that looks a lot better. Now we can adjust this, pull this down. Again, if we're going too far, we stretch out that joint a little bit, rounding it. Now if we look what's happening, we can see how we're able to create that bend. Now if I didn't want to go back to frame 1 and copy that, but if I had a keyframe right here, F6, click on the deformation group, and we can reset it so it actually resets back to its original position, but I don't really care about that. Just using that for demonstration purposes. So you can see how we're able to create these flowing snake-like animations very easily just using a curve deformer. So it's a nice way of working. Now I'm going to just take that deformer here and I'm going to pull it out. I'll drag it out so it's not there anymore, and this time I'm going to select my rigging tool and go to the envelope deformer. Now the envelope deformer, there's an auto envelope option that we can choose on it, where envelope creator, and it will create an envelope, and we can then choose some, gotta actually select it, and we have different options that we can work with here. We can choose how many points we want on it, whether we want 6 points or 4 points, 8 points. So 6 is not a bad 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 can be a good way of working. You get kind of 3 at the bottom, 3 at the top. We could choose 8, so we have 1s in the middle. The more points you have, the harder it is to animate when you're using an envelope deformer. We're just going to draw one though, and I'm going to, again, So with the Curve Deformer, we go to the beginning, we select that there, so I click and drag the direction I'm going to go. I'm going to go clockwise, and now I will click and drag to create a handle. Click and drag, click and drag, click and drag, click and drag. Now I get to the end, I hold down the Alt or Option key, and then we can see how my cursor changes from a crosshair, puts the letter C next to it, and now it closes, and now I can click and drag to insert handle. I know I want it to be about that long. And now we can see while I'm using the rigging tool, I can adjust these points, and what I'm trying to do is to get this envelope to precisely follow my shape. Now right now we can see how these are curve points, but if I did want to move one of those handles independently, if I hold down Option, we can see how I can break it and effectively create a corner. Doesn't make sense to do that here, but if you did need to. So we try and get it as close to it as we can. So now if I go and click on my transform tool, should see all green, click on the one I'm trying to affect. Now when we work with it, you can see how we can stretch it. But now if I wanted to animate this similar to what I did before, kind of creating that appendage, well, that's going to be tricky. I would either need more points. It's not going to be well suited to it. You can see how it really does break the interior artwork. So this works best when you have flat colors, but when you have any type of texture within your colors, it can seriously get super ugly. So we can see that in this instance, having an overlay layer is not going to be beneficial, and we would want to just have a solid color. So let's just pull that out, put this back in over here, and now we can see how this one is going to be using the curve. Back in the rigging tool, the Curve Deformer is going to be much better than the envelope for this particular venture. But when you're doing a cutout character, typically every drawing layer has an envelope around it so that you can manipulate it across frames. So then when your character is doing a 360 rotation, or you need more flexibility when you're animating, that's going to be the way to work. So again, we add in the deformation with the rigging tool. Now if we don't see our deformation that we have here, if I click on the drawing layer, and we don't need the rigging tool active, but if I click on the green show deformers, it now pulls up and shows the deformers that I have attached to this. I can click on the hide controls button here and they go away. So once again, you click on this. Now if you have multiple layers that all have deformers and you want to see these manipulators, you then click on this one where it shows multiple deformers and you can see that. So if you get a full cutout character rig with envelope deformers on everything, highlight all your drawing layers, click on this, it lights up like a holiday tree. So again, we can click on this to make it go away, but when we want to animate with the deformer, we can just click on that and click over to here. Normally on a complex cutout character scene, we're not going to be just clicking on the deformation, but we'll be clicking on the artwork. So if I click on the artwork layer here with my transform tool because I want to animate, then what we want to do is say show deformers, and then that will show my selected deformer. So again, that's how to do it. If you don't like your deformer and you go into your node view, you can just simply hold down Option or Alt, drag it out of the chain, so it's not connected in there anymore, and if you want to get rid of it, well, simply get rid of it. And that is how to get started using deformers.